All right, let's dive into something chilling. This one is about the haunting of a place that's been abandoned for years, yet something there refuses to stay forgotten. The small town of Briarwood had always been quiet, its few dozen residents living their lives under the peaceful shadow of the surrounding woods. But there was one place that everyone avoided, the old house at the end of Hemlock Lane. It had stood there for as long as anyone could remember, its windows dark, its doors boarded up, its once grand facade crumbling into decay. No one knew much about the house's past. All that was known was that it had been abandoned for decades after a family of 4 disappeared without a trace. The police had investigated, but no clues were ever found. The house had stood vacant ever since, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. Over time, it became a local legend. Children dared each other to sneak onto the property, and old-timers spoke in hushed tones about the eerie noises that sometimes echoed from its rotting walls at night. That was until a man named David moved to Briarwood. David was an outsider, a writer, searching for inspiration in the quiet of the countryside. He had heard the rumors about the house on Hemlock Lane, but being the skeptical type, he didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural stories. To him, the house was just an old, abandoned building, a place where the townspeople had let their imaginations run wild. He saw it as the perfect setting for a horror novel, an eerie backdrop to spark his creativity. On his first day in Briarwood, David drove out to the house. The road to it was overgrown, the trees on either side twisting unnaturally, as though reaching out to grab him. The house loomed in the distance, shrouded by the dense fog that seemed to follow it wherever it went. The wooden fence around the property was broken in places, the gate hanging off its hinges as if reluctant to let anyone pass. David parked his car at the end of the lane and walked toward the house. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about the place that unsettled him. Maybe it was the way the air felt heavier here, as if the house had absorbed years of bad memories. Or maybe it was the silence. There was no sound, not even the chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves in the wind. Just a thick, unnatural stillness. He pushed open the gate, and as he stepped onto the property, he noticed the ground felt soft underfoot, almost spongy. There were no weeds or grass growing, just bare earth, like something had been buried there long ago. The front door of the house was slightly ajar, as though inviting him in. David hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity overpowered his caution. He entered the house, his footsteps creaking on the rotting wooden floors. The interior was just as decayed as the exterior. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in the corners like forgotten memories. Faded wallpaper peeled off the walls, and the furniture was covered in thick sheets, as though the family who had lived there had simply vanished in the middle of their lives. He began to explore the house, his mind racing with ideas for his novel. The eerie atmosphere was perfect. But as he moved from room to room, something began to feel off. At first it was just a feeling, a sense that he wasn't alone. Then the sounds began. A soft whisper, faint, like a voice carried on the wind. David paused, straining his ears, but there was no one there. He continued on, trying to shake the feeling that the house was somehow watching him. Then he found it, the attic. The ladder was old and frail, but it seemed sturdy enough. David climbed up, the air growing colder as he reached the top. The attic was dark, except for the weak light filtering through a small window at the far end. The space was filled with old trunks, dusty bookshelves and boxes of forgotten belongings. But in the corner of the room, something caught his eye. A large ornate mirror stood against the wall, covered in dust. It was an antique with intricate carvings along the frame, beautiful yet out of place in such a decaying house. David approached it cautiously, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. But as he studied it, something felt wrong. His reflection didn't move with him. He took a step back, watching as his reflection remained frozen, a second behind his own movements. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, He reached out to touch the glass, and just as his fingers made contact, the reflection. David jerked his hand back, heart racing. He spun around, but the attic was empty. There was no one there, no one else in the house, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Suddenly, the door to the attic slammed shut behind him. David's breath caught in his throat. The room went cold, colder than it had been before. He reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though something or someone was holding it shut from the other side. Then from the corner of the room, he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, closer. His pulse quickened. He turned, expecting to see something, anything, but the attic was still empty. The footsteps continued, growing nearer and nearer, until they were right behind him. David spun around, heart pounding in his chest, but the attic was still vacant, except for the mirror. He took a step forward and found himself staring into the glass once again. This time, his reflection was him. It was the family. The same family who had disappeared all those years ago, mother, father, 2 children, standing silently in the reflection. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their expressions frozen in a haunting, vacant stare. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there staring at him. Then slowly, the reflection began to change. The father in the mirror raised a hand, his finger pointing directly at David. A voice whispered from nowhere, echoing in his ears. David stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His fingers fumbled at the door handle, and with a sudden, desperate pull, he broke free, rushing down the stairs and out of the house, his mind spinning with fear. He didn't look back. When he finally reached his car, he slammed the door behind him and drove as fast as he could. The image of the family's staring eyes burned into his mind. The town of Briarwood was still small, still quiet, but David knew now that there were some things, some places that should never be explored. The house on Hemlock Lane still stands to this day, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover its secrets. And if you ever happen to pass by, you might hear those footsteps, slow and deliberate, just behind you. And if you listen close enough, you might even hear them whisper your name.